Talk Ava. Learn English with confidence.
Welcome back, everyone. I want to begin today's episode with something that made me stop and think a few days ago. I was watching an interview with a famous athlete, and the interviewer described him as a very smart person because of the decisions he made during competitions. Later that evening, I watched a completely different video where someone solved a difficult puzzle, and the comments were full of people saying that was such a clever solution. I understood both words, but I started wondering why native speakers naturally changed from one word to the other.
That's a great question, because most native speakers never stop to think about it. We hear both words from childhood, so using them feels completely natural. We don't open a grammar book before speaking. We simply use the word that sounds right for the situation.
I think that's exactly why English learners become confused. They look up both words in a dictionary and discover that they seem very similar. Then they start listening to real conversations and realize people don't use them in exactly the same situations. That's when they begin asking themselves if they're missing an important rule.
The interesting thing is that everyday English isn't only about rules. It's also about experience. The more conversations you hear, the more you notice little patterns that feel difficult to explain, but very easy to recognize. Native speakers hear those patterns thousands of times while they're growing up, so eventually they become automatic.
Yesterday, I had one of those everyday moments that reminded me of today's topic. I couldn't find my house keys anywhere. I checked my pockets, looked on the kitchen table, searched my backpack, and even looked inside the refrigerator because I once accidentally left my phone there after putting away groceries. After several minutes, I still had no idea where the keys were.
That sounds exactly like something I would do. Whenever I'm in a hurry, I suddenly become much less organized. I'll search every room in the house before discovering the thing I need was sitting in the most obvious place the whole time.
That's almost exactly what happened. After searching everywhere, I sat down for a moment and tried to remember everything I'd done since arriving home. Suddenly, I remembered carrying a package into the living room. I walked over to the bookshelf, moved one magazine, and there were my keys. I started laughing because I'd spent 10 minutes looking everywhere except the place where I'd actually left them.
Moments like that are surprisingly satisfying because they remind us that solving a problem doesn't always depend on working harder. Sometimes it simply requires looking at the situation from a different angle.
That's probably why I enjoy conversations about everyday life. Small situations often teach us something interesting. Losing your keys isn't a major problem, but finding them can make you think differently about how you solve problems in general.
Exactly. Everyday situations are wonderful teachers because they happen to everyone. Whether you're cooking dinner, cleaning the house, planning a trip, or trying to remember where you left your glasses, life gives you countless opportunities to think creatively without even realizing it.
That's one of the reasons we enjoy making these podcasts. Instead of discussing difficult grammar rules, we simply talk about ordinary experiences. Those experiences help vocabulary feel natural because the words become connected to real situations instead of isolated examples.
Before we continue, we'd love to hear from you. Which word do you hear more often in English conversations? Smart or clever? Let us know in the comments because we'd love to hear about your experience learning English.
Your story about solving problems reminds me of a really fun experience I had last year. A group of friends invited me to an escape room for the first time. I'd heard people talk about escape rooms before, but I'd never actually tried one. I thought we'd simply answer a few questions and leave after half an hour. I quickly discovered I had completely underestimated the challenge.
Escape rooms are fascinating because they encourage people to think in completely different ways. One person notices tiny details, another connects different clues together, and someone else suddenly sees a solution that nobody else had considered. It's a wonderful example of teamwork.
That's exactly what happened with our group. As soon as the door closed behind us, everyone rushed around the room looking for clues. Some people opened drawers, others searched behind pictures on the walls, and one friend immediately began reading every note he could find. At first, the room looked completely ordinary, but after a few minutes, we realized almost everything inside it was connected to a puzzle.
I always enjoy watching how different personalities react in situations like that. Some people stay calm and think carefully before doing anything, while others become excited and start searching every corner of the room. Both approaches can be useful because everyone contributes something different.
One of my friends surprised all of us. He wasn't the loudest person in the group, and he didn't rush around looking for clues. Instead, he quietly watched everyone else for a few minutes. Then he noticed a tiny symbol hidden on the side of a bookshelf that none of us had even seen. That small discovery helped us solve the first puzzle much faster. It's amazing how one small observation can completely change the situation. Sometimes people think solving problems is only about working harder, but careful observation can be just as important. Looking closely often reveals things we've been walking past the entire time.
Later, we reached another challenge involving several locks and a complicated code. We spent almost 15 minutes trying different ideas without making any progress. Then, one friend suddenly remembered something we'd seen at the beginning of the game. We returned to the first room, looked more carefully at an old clock hanging on the wall, and immediately realized it contained the final clue we needed.
That's such a satisfying moment because everyone suddenly understands how the different pieces fit together. The answer feels obvious afterward, even though it seemed impossible only a few minutes earlier.
We escaped with only 3 minutes remaining, and everyone started cheering as though we'd won an important competition. Looking back, I don't think we were celebrating because we solved a few puzzles. We were celebrating because everyone contributed something valuable. No single person solved everything alone.
I think that's a wonderful lesson for everyday life as well. Whether you're working on a project, learning a language, or solving a problem at home, different people bring different strengths. Sometimes the best solution appears because several ideas come together instead of one person doing everything.
That's also why I enjoy learning English through conversations. Every discussion gives us a chance to hear different perspectives and different ways of thinking. Over time, those conversations quietly teach us much more than vocabulary. They teach us how people naturally communicate, solve problems, and work together.
If you're enjoying today's conversation, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who's learning English. In the next part of today's episode, we're going to look back at our school days and remember classmates who impressed us in completely different ways. Those memories taught us something interesting about intelligence that we didn't fully understand at the time.
I think everyone will recognize at least one person from those stories, because every classroom has students with different talents, different strengths, and different ways of thinking.
Our conversation about the escape room reminds me of my school days because every classroom seemed to have students who impressed everyone for completely different reasons. At the time, I didn't really think about it. Looking back now, I realize every class had people with different kinds of intelligence, and each person contributed something unique.
I remember exactly what you mean. There was one student in my class who always finished math tests before everyone else. Whenever the teacher asked a difficult question, he already had his hand in the air before most of us had even finished reading the problem. Everyone admired how quickly he understood new ideas.
We had someone very similar in my class. He always achieved excellent grades, and teachers often asked him to explain difficult questions to the rest of us. What impressed me wasn't just his knowledge, it was the calm way he approached every challenge. Even during exams, when everyone else looked nervous, he always seemed relaxed and confident.
Then there were students who surprised people in completely different ways. One of my classmates wasn't always the first to finish assignments, but whenever our teacher gave us a group project, everyone wanted her on the team. She organized people, solved unexpected problems, and somehow kept everyone working together without making anyone feel left out.
That's such a good example because school isn't only about taking tests.
I remember a science project where our class had to build a simple model together. One student wasn't especially interested in writing reports, but he could build almost anything with his hands. Whenever something broke, he quietly fixed it within minutes, while the rest of us were still trying to understand what had gone wrong.
I think those experiences quietly teach us an important lesson. Success doesn't always look the same. Some people express their abilities through books and exams, while others shine during practical tasks, creative activities, or teamwork. Every classroom is full of different strengths.
I also remember one friend who was amazing at explaining things. If I didn't understand part of a lesson, I often asked him for help after class. Somehow he could explain difficult ideas using very simple examples. After talking to him for 5 minutes, everything suddenly became much clearer.
That's a wonderful skill, because understanding something yourself is one thing, but helping another person understand it is something completely different. Good teachers often have that ability. They don't simply know the answer, they know how to guide someone else toward discovering it.
Looking back now, I think many of us only focused on exam results because those were easy to measure. We didn't always notice the student who encouraged everyone else, the person who solved practical problems, or the classmate who made group projects enjoyable. Those qualities became much more valuable later in life.
I completely agree. School gives us many opportunities to learn, but some of the most important lessons don't appear in textbooks. We learn how to communicate, cooperate, solve problems together, and appreciate that different people bring different strengths to every situation.
That's probably why I enjoy meeting old classmates today. The people who seemed completely different at school have all followed unique paths. Some became teachers, some started businesses, others work in healthcare, technology, or creative industries. It's interesting to see how everyone's strengths found different places to grow.
I think that's encouraging because it reminds us there isn't only one way to succeed. Every person develops at a different pace, and every person has abilities that become valuable in different situations. That's one of the most positive lessons we can take from our school memories.
Speaking of different strengths, I've always admired people who stay calm when unexpected problems appear. You know the kind of person I'm talking about. Everyone else starts worrying, but they quietly look around, think for a moment, and somehow find a practical solution that nobody else had considered.
I know exactly the kind of person you mean. My neighbor is like that. Last winter, my bicycle suddenly developed a problem with the chain. I was convinced I'd have to take it to a repair shop because I couldn't even figure out what was wrong. My neighbor walked over, looked at it for less than 2 minutes, and immediately understood the problem. After making one small adjustment, the bicycle worked perfectly again.
That's impressive because those people rarely panic. They don't waste time complaining about the problem. They simply become curious and start looking for possible solutions. That calm attitude often helps them notice details everyone else has missed.
My grandmother had a similar ability in the kitchen. If she discovered she was missing one ingredient while preparing dinner, she never seemed worried. She would smile, open another cupboard, and somehow create a wonderful meal using something completely different. As a child, I honestly thought she could solve almost any problem.
My mother was exactly the same. I remember one family gathering when several unexpected guests arrived. Instead of feeling stressed, she simply adjusted the meal, prepared a few extra dishes, and made everyone feel welcome. Nobody would have guessed anything had changed because she handled the situation so naturally.
That's something I really admire. Some people seem to view problems as interesting challenges instead of obstacles. They stay calm, think carefully, and focus on what they can do instead of worrying about what they can't change.
I think that attitude becomes useful in everyday life. Whether you're organizing a small apartment, repairing something around the house, planning a trip, or even learning a new language, unexpected situations appear all the time. Staying calm often leads to better solutions than becoming frustrated.
I experienced that while helping a friend move into a new apartment. The living room was much smaller than expected, and at first it looked impossible to fit all the furniture inside. We stood there looking at everything, wondering what to do. Then one friend suggested turning the sofa in a different direction and moving the bookshelf to another wall. Suddenly, the room felt much larger, and everything fit perfectly.
That's such a satisfying feeling, because sometimes the solution isn't complicated at all. We simply need to stop looking at the situation in the same way and become willing to try something different.
I think everyday life gives us opportunities like that much more often than we realize. Most of the problems we face aren't huge emergencies. They're small situations that ask us to stay patient, think clearly, and remain open to different possibilities.
Exactly. Those everyday moments quietly build confidence because every time we solve a problem, we remind ourselves that we're capable of handling the next one too. Over time, those experiences shape the way we approach new challenges, making us calmer, more creative, and much more confident than we were before.
Our conversation today has made me realize something interesting. When people hear the word smart, they often imagine someone solving difficult math problems or inventing amazing technology. But when I think about the smartest people I've met, I usually remember something much simpler. They often made quiet decisions that improved their lives little by little, instead of trying to impress everyone around them.
I completely agree, because everyday life gives us hundreds of opportunities to make thoughtful decisions. Most of them aren't dramatic or exciting. They're small habits that slowly shape the future without attracting much attention. Choosing to get enough sleep, saving a little money every month, spending time with supportive friends, or setting aside time to learn something new may not seem remarkable today, but those choices become very meaningful over time.
I remember talking to one of my friends about money a few years ago. I assumed he had a complicated investment plan because he always seemed financially comfortable. Instead, he smiled and told me his biggest habit was surprisingly simple. Whenever he received his salary, he immediately saved a small amount before spending anything else. He explained that he wasn't trying to become rich overnight. He simply wanted to build a habit that would help him in the future.
That's such a practical example, because people sometimes believe good decisions must be huge, life-changing moments. In reality, many successful people simply repeat small, positive habits consistently. The results become noticeable only after months or years, but those little decisions quietly create a completely different future.
I think learning English works exactly the same way. Some learners become discouraged because they expect dramatic improvement after studying for 1 week. Then they meet someone who has become fluent and assume that person has a special talent. What they often don't see is the daily practice that happened over a very long period.
That's one of my favorite lessons about language learning. Spending 20 or 30 minutes listening to English every day may not seem impressive, but after a year, those small sessions become hundreds of hours of practice. Progress usually arrives gradually instead of all at once.
Time management is another interesting example. I used to leave almost everything until the last minute because I believed I worked better under pressure. Eventually, I realized that constantly rushing created unnecessary stress. Once I started planning my week a little more carefully, everything became much calmer. The work itself didn't become easier, but my days certainly felt more organized.
I think many people discover that eventually. Good planning doesn't remove every challenge, but it gives us more time to think clearly instead of constantly reacting to unexpected situations. Even simple routines can make everyday life feel much more manageable.
Looking back, I don't think the smartest decisions in my life were the ones people noticed immediately. They were the quiet choices that slowly improved my health, my confidence, my friendships, and my daily routine.
I completely agree. Some of the best decisions don't receive applause or attention. They simply make tomorrow a little better than yesterday. And after enough time, those small improvements become something truly meaningful.
Everything we've discussed today reminds me why I enjoy listening to native English conversations so much. When native speakers use words like smart and clever, they don't pause to think about vocabulary. They're completely focused on the story they're telling or the person they're talking to. The words simply appear naturally because they fit the situation.
I noticed that while watching a cooking program recently. One of the chefs discovered he didn't have an important ingredient, but instead of stopping the recipe, he calmly found another way to prepare the dish. The judges smiled and admired the solution because it solved the problem without making the meal more complicated. The whole conversation sounded completely natural because nobody was trying to teach English. They were simply reacting to what happened.
I love moments like that because television programs often reflect everyday communication. Whether people are cooking, traveling, repairing something, or playing a game together, they naturally describe ideas in ways that feel authentic. Those situations help learners understand vocabulary without needing long explanations.
Sports provide another great example. I enjoy watching football, and after matches, I often listen to interviews with the players. Some interviews focus on teamwork, while others discuss important decisions made during the game. Even though every interview is different, the language always feels relaxed because the players are simply describing their experiences.
That's why I always encourage learners to listen to English they genuinely enjoy. If you love travel, watch travel conversations. If you enjoy cooking, listen to cooking shows. If you're interested in sports, interviews can be a fantastic resource. Learning becomes much easier when you're curious about the topic itself.
I realized that while helping my cousin improve his English. At first, he spent most of his time memorizing vocabulary lists, but he quickly became bored. Then he started listening to podcasts about photography because that's one of his favorite hobbies. Within a few months, he was understanding much more English because he genuinely wanted to know what the speakers were discussing.
That's such a powerful lesson because motivation changes everything. When you're interested in the conversation, you naturally pay closer attention. Your brain begins connecting words with real experiences instead of isolated definitions. And those memories last much longer.
Before we continue, we'd love to hear from you. Who is the smartest person you know, and what makes that person special? Maybe they always stay calm during difficult situations, perhaps they solve practical problems, or maybe they're simply wonderful at helping other people. We'd love to read your stories in the comments.
Every answer will probably be different, and that's exactly what makes the question so interesting. Intelligence appears in many different forms, and the people we admire often teach us valuable lessons through the way they live, rather than through the things they say.
I think that's one of the biggest ideas we've explored today. Native speakers don't choose words by remembering complicated rules. They pay attention to the situation, the people around them, and the message they want to share. The vocabulary naturally follows.
And that's exactly how confident English grows. The more real conversations you hear, the more naturally these patterns become part of your own speech. Eventually, you stop worrying about individual words because expressing your ideas begins to feel comfortable and natural.
After everything we've talked about today, I think there's one idea that stayed with me more than anything else. For a long time, I believed being smart meant being the person who always had the right answer. I imagined someone who earned the highest grades, solved every difficult question, and never seemed confused about anything. As I grew older, I slowly realized that real life is much more interesting than that.
I completely agree, because the people I've admired most throughout my life all had very different strengths. One friend could remember amazing amounts of information, another could make people laugh during stressful situations, and someone else always knew how to bring a group of people together. They were all impressive, but for completely different reasons.
I remember one of my university friends who wasn't the best student in our class. During exams, he often looked just as nervous as everyone else. However, whenever our group had to work on a project together, he became the person everyone depended on. He listened carefully, organized everyone's ideas, encouraged people who felt unsure, and somehow helped the whole team produce better work.
That's such a valuable ability because communication is a skill that often becomes more important as life goes on. Many successful people aren't remembered because they always had the perfect answer. They're remembered because they knew how to work with others, solve problems together, and help people feel confident.
I also have a cousin who's incredibly talented with music. He can't explain complicated scientific theories, but give him any musical instrument, and within a short time, he'll begin creating beautiful melodies. Watching him reminds me that intelligence isn't limited to classrooms or textbooks. It appears in creativity, imagination, and countless other areas of life.
I feel exactly the same way whenever I watch artists at work. Some people see an empty piece of paper while others immediately imagine a painting. Some hear ordinary sounds, but musicians hear rhythm and harmony. Those abilities deserve just as much admiration as academic success because they enrich the world in completely different ways.
Sports provide another great example. A professional athlete makes hundreds of decisions during a single game, often within only a few seconds. They read the situation, react quickly, and adjust their actions without having time to stop and think. That's an incredible skill that takes years of practice to develop.
That's why comparing people is rarely helpful. Every person has experiences, talents, and interests that make them unique. Instead of asking whether someone is smart, I think it's much more interesting to ask what they're especially good at and how they use those abilities to improve their own life and the lives of other people.
Looking back, I think some of the smartest people I've ever met were also the kindest. They listened carefully, treated others with respect, admitted when they didn't know something, and never felt the need to prove they were the most intelligent person in the room. That quiet confidence always impressed me much more than showing off.
I couldn't agree more. True confidence often comes from curiosity rather than certainty. People who continue asking questions, learning new skills, and appreciating other people's talents usually keep growing throughout their lives.
Well, we've reached the end of today's conversation, and I have to say, this episode became much more meaningful than I expected. We began by talking about 2 English words, but along the way, we found ourselves discussing school memories, escape rooms, everyday challenges, life decisions, teamwork, and the many different ways people solve problems.
That's one of the reasons I enjoy these conversations so much. Language is never only about vocabulary. Every word carries real experiences, real people, and real situations with it. Once you hear English inside natural conversations, the words become much easier to remember because they become part of a story instead of a list.
When I think back to today's episode, I remember searching for my lost keys, working together with friends in the escape room, talking about classmates who impressed us in different ways, and sharing stories about people who always seem to find creative solutions to everyday problems. Each of those experiences reminded me that intelligence doesn't always look the same.
Exactly. Sometimes it appears in a classroom, sometimes in a workshop, sometimes in a kitchen, and sometimes during an ordinary conversation between friends. That's one of the wonderful things about people. We all bring different strengths into the world, and those differences make life much more interesting.
I also hope today's episode encourages everyone learning English to spend more time listening to authentic conversations. Native speakers don't stop in the middle of a sentence to think about vocabulary rules. They focus on communicating clearly, telling stories, and connecting with the people around them. The words naturally fit the situation because they've heard them used that way throughout their lives.
That's why listening is such a powerful way to learn. Every podcast, every interview, every conversation, and every story gives you another opportunity to notice how English is really spoken. Little by little, those patterns become familiar, and one day you'll realize you're understanding much more without translating every sentence in your head.
I think learning a language is very similar to developing any other skill. Progress doesn't usually happen all at once. It grows through small daily experiences, regular practice, curiosity, and the willingness to keep learning even when things feel difficult. Those quiet moments of progress eventually become real confidence.
They certainly do. Every conversation you listen to teaches you something valuable, even if you don't notice it immediately. Over time, those lessons come together, helping you speak more naturally, understand more easily, and enjoy English much more than when you first started.
If you enjoyed spending time with us today, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and
and share it with someone who's learning English. Your support helps us continue creating natural conversations that make English enjoyable, practical, and easy to understand.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope today's conversation helped you hear how native speakers naturally use smart and clever in everyday English. More importantly, we hope it reminded you that every person has unique strengths, and every conversation is another opportunity to learn something new. We can't wait to see you again in our next episode.